let's discuss all the interesting things that took place over the last week. So number one, the Saudi-backed Live Golf. It is now going to form a single entity with the PGA Tour. Now, this is interesting as over the last 2 years, these entities have been duking it out in the courts over countless litigation. But according to Wall Street Journal leaks, it appears that the PGA Tour just quite simply can't continue to afford all of those attorney fees, especially given that Live Golf, which is funded by Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Public Investment Fund, the PIF, they have countless money that could fund this forever. So the PGA can't compete. So they're like, if we can't beat them, let's join them. Now, number two on the list was the explosion of the Kakhovka Dam over the Dnipro River in Ukraine. Now, no one exactly 100% sure, other than those who blew it up, knows what happened. But my guess is that the Russians decided to blow up the dam. Now, based upon reports that I've read, structurally it is difficult to blow up except from a discharge internally onto one of the infrastructure. So with the Russians having control of the dam would allow them to facilitate. But additionally, in the short term, it would benefit the Russians as flooding swaths of southern Ukraine would limit the military fronts that Ukraine could leverage to attack Russian troops. I mean, and due to this, there's only so many ways now that Ukraine can attack Russia. So Russia can consolidate and limit the fronts that it needs to spread its human resources amongst. So in the short term, it definitely benefits Russia. The long term, not so much, especially as it will deprive their occupied territory of Crimea of water, but Russia isn't always necessarily known objectively for using the most foresight, especially regarding water. I mean, if you look back to the Soviet times and how they drained the Aral Sea in Uzbekistan, that is a case in point. Now, the third interesting thing that took place was Air India flight going from Mumbai to San Francisco that had to get diverted to the Russian city of Magadan. This is particularly interesting as it's a case study for what's going to happen throughout the rest of the Ukraine conflict. So many Western airlines have stopped their airlines from going over Russian territory. Now, not all countries have followed this path, particularly, for example, like India. Delhi, they're pretty cozy with Moscow. And in fact, India is one of the biggest purchasers of Russian petroleum. So Air India is continuing to use Russian airspace, but the fact that this flight had to get diverted, I mean, one, it's going to be interesting to see how is Air India going to fix this plane, or they're just going to have to give up the aircraft, particularly as international sanctions won't allow aircraft parts to be flown into Russia to fix it. And then secondly, will Russia risk irritating Delhi by arresting any American citizens that are likely on the board of the plane, especially since the final destination of the flight was San Francisco. Now, because in theory, I mean, Russia could arrest people, but would they really want to irritate one of their staunchest, or if not staunchest, at least one of the major players in the international community that have not explicitly condemned their efforts and are supporting their economy through purchasing petrol? I wouldn't think so, but it has yet to be resolved, at least to my knowledge. Now, another interesting thing that happened is that the Turkish lira plummeted to historic lows against the dollar, and many international investors are saying that this is due to Turkey halting efforts to artificially prop up the lira, which is a welcome announcement as far as international investors are concerned, especially as, I mean, this is a very costly effort to artificially prop up the lira. Alone, Ankara has spent 25 billion USD this year to do so on what is essentially a fool's errand. So many are seeing this as hopefully a welcome notice that Ankara is going to go back to traditional economic orthodoxy. But this has yet to be seen, and we will see more in the upcoming weeks, especially as Turkey has announced their new central banker, who is Hafize Erkan. Now, she earned her PhD at Princeton University here in the States. She also worked for Goldman Sachs. So she has experience in Wall Street, but she also has experience in risk management at First Republic Bank. Now, First Republic, if you recall, was one of those banks that was involved in that financial crisis earlier this year, which was one of the worst since 2008, as the depositors made a run on the bank, causing it ultimately to fold. So given her risk management experience there, it kind of makes you sort of question how competent she may or may not be. Additionally, huge venture capital firm Sequoia Capital, they are breaking up into 3 separate entities. So the weight of geopolitical tensions between Beijing and Washington has made them decide that it's just better for us to de-risk and break ourselves up. So there's going to be an India entity, a China entity, and a United States entity. And it's going to be interesting to see if other organizations follow suit in the coming years. 7th, the Nigerian central banker Emefiele, he got sacked on Friday and then arrested on Saturday. And Emefiele, under his tenure at the central bank, there was definitely some questionable monetary policies. For one, I remember currency controls really drew the ire of many multinationals, particularly, for example, Middle Eastern Gulf carriers, who were irritated that they could not repatriate their funds made within the Nigerian market and caused them to threaten to potentially leave the Nigerian market altogether. Emefiele, they also, some of his questionable monetary policies include during the election season to recall a lot of the old Naira currency notes, which caused a lot of panic and currency shortages. 8th, the Armenian Prime Minister Pashinyan, he made some very curious questions over this last week regarding potentially giving back the occupied exclave of Kharkiv to Azerbaijan. So under the Soviet Union, there were a lot of exclaves within Central Asia and Transcaucasia, which are very curious. I encourage you to go look at those on a map. If you're not familiar, that's exactly what those are. But Kharkiv in particular is intriguing in that it's a major transit point in between Iran and Georgia. So a major highway runs through Kharkiv. So this really causes a lot of questions on my end as to why is Pashinyan stating this. I mean, he didn't give any rationale or any timetables for definitively handing over this exclave or any others that Armenia currently occupies that are traditionally and historically owned by Azerbaijan. But it makes you wonder, is this a tentative requirement stemming from Baku in order to ultimately come to a peace deal over the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict? I'm not sure, but I'm definitely going to be paying attention to it going forward. Number 9, U.S. aid and some UN food organizations that provide food distribution and donations to impoverished countries. They are halting food donations to Ethiopia over accusations that allegedly Addis Ababa is diverting food that's supposed to go to impoverished Ethiopian citizenry instead directly to the Ethiopian military. And number 10, a particularly curious event took place in Indonesia. So Indonesian naval drills took place involving many countries. Now, naval or military drills are not all that uncommon. In fact, they happen all the time if you're paying attention to the news. But what made this particularly noteworthy is who was involved, particularly the United States, Russia, and China, which is pretty profound given the current geopolitical state of the globe. And then lastly, one extra tidbit that was interesting, even though it technically took place today, Monday, I'm going to include it. So Silvio Berlusconi, who was the longest post-war serving prime minister of Italy, he passed away this morning, and he is controversial for a myriad of reasons, but due to his passing, it sounds like Italy's not going to have any more of his infamous bunga bunga parties.